You had to do his close-up, man. Give the man a break. The the joint meeting of the Information Technology and Government Affairs and the Budget and Finance Committee will now come to order. We do have 2 members of each committee present. That means that for the Information Technology Committee, we do have a majority present, and for the Budget and Finance Committee, we are beginning with a minority of present members. And we have 2 items on the agenda. We'll begin with item number 1 and probably spend more time when we hear item number 2, but item number 1, we'll go with that one first. And so far, I have a public comment card, and it doesn't say whether it's item 1 or 2 or general public comment. Leslie Dutton, are you here to speak on item 1 or 2? Both? But we're not hearing them together. So if you'd like to speak on item 1, I'll call you up on item 1. If you'd like to wait for item 2, I'll call you up for item 2. So which one? No, not at the moment. I just want to know when to call you up. Okay. All right. 1 and 2. So what I'll do is, normally we take 1 card per item, but we'll call you up on both. Okay? So you'll come up twice. Because we're not, if we heard them together, we'd call you up once. All right. Item number 1, please. Please read.
Information Technology Agency has submitted a report relative to LA City View 35 strategic plan. This has been approved by the Municipal Access Policy Board.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, council members. Mark Wolf with ITA. To my left is William Imperial of ITA, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you Andrew Glazier, board member of the Municipal Access Policy Board, which is the board that oversees Channel 35.
Okay.
Good afternoon, council members. This is Andrew Glazier, board member of Municipal Access Policy Board. Is this running the PowerPoint? Yes. Okay. All right. So, Channel 35 started operating as a government access cable outlet back in 1989 under operating guidelines approved by the council. And it continues to operate roughly under those same guidelines at this particular time. It's broadcast continuously since then, and programming includes a mix of live and rebroadcast public meetings, original content produced by the studio, and some content created by third-party producers. For many years, cable has been an effective way of reaching audiences through television. While Channel 35 has begun to incorporate new technologies such as live webcasts and content on demand, there remains vast opportunities for increasing the usefulness of the station as a communications vehicle both for the city of Los Angeles and for Angelenos. And there's a pressing need to refocus away from cable television as its primary media. A few things have happened in recent years that spurred on this report. First, media is experiencing a complete transformation right now. Channel 35 must adapt to these changes in order to maintain its relevance and usefulness to the people of Los Angeles. 2, as resources have become dramatically constrained in recent times, Channel 35 needs to use its existing resources more efficiently. 3rd, the Los Angeles Comptroller's Office issued an audit in 2008-09 that suggested that now is a prime opportunity for the city to solidify its vision for PEG access. And finally, in 2008, the now defunct Board of Information Technology Commissioners, which was BITSI, and the Municipal Access Policy Board, we jointly issued a report with recommendations for realigning the various city-owned cable outlets. In response to these various needs, in January 2009, the Municipal Access Policy Board requested that ITA and Channel 35 staff create a strategic working group to address these issues. A diverse group of experts and stakeholders were invited to evaluate our business and service models and to think broadly about how this city resource can be repositioned to provide maximum value to taxpayers and how we can be on the leading edge of e-government. In addition to myself, invited participants included Mark Wolf, ITA's Executive Officer, Tony Agani, Channel 35 Station Manager, Adam Cooper from the Mayor's Office, Julie Wong from Council President Garcetti's Office, Stacy Ballou from Council District 6, Madeline Pagao, ITA's Web Service Director, and Michael Spiegelman, who was then a Vice President with Yahoo. He's now Director of Web Products with Netflix. In addition to the regular meetings of this group, we also held 2 focus group meetings with public information officers from multiple city departments, and I was also able to meet with Channel 35 counterparts at New York City Media on a personal trip to New York. We began to work in April 2009 with the goal of realizing the mission of Channel 35 more fully by leveraging new technologies in distribution, interactivity, and content, and to reestablish Channel 35 at the forefront of e-government. Channel 35 has many strengths. We provide economical, full-service in-house production. We provide niche programming on items that are perhaps too small for major media outlets to cover, but still very important. Hyper-local content, such as parades or highlighting community heroes, and internal media support services, such as council phone and city council coverage. We have specific technical expertise for working with the city at city locations, seamless integration to lacity.org, and channels that can be fully dedicated to covering city government and city issues on an all-city cable distribution backbone. But there are also challenges with this current distribution model. The broadcast schedule is constantly preempted by meetings. The only predictable slots for programming other than meetings is prime time on Mondays and Thursdays. So we may have a lot of programming that people want to watch, but it's hard to tell them when it's going to be on. Audience is generally limited to cable viewers. We have limited utilization of new media, and there's no prioritization of content. Our old guidelines, our current operating guidelines, place the burden of creating programming on others, on clients. And our programming doesn't really conform to any specific priorities or policy directions, and we have very limited feedback data that tells us if people are watching anything, or if they are watching, what they like. What we soon realized was that the relevance of this channel required a complete shift in how we view this resource. Rather than thinking of Channel 35 as a cable station, we had to start thinking of it as a multimedia producer that happens to have a cable station as a backbone. That shift in our thinking allowed for all kinds of new possibilities in terms of how this resource could be fully utilized going into the future. As it also happened during this process, the world entered a financial crisis. Channel 35 experienced significant cuts, and as a result has had to adapt its operations to the reality of a new budget. In the midst of crisis, however, there is always opportunity. In this case, we had an opportunity to think through how to do more with less, and also to plan strategically for a future when budgets may be less constrained. Therefore, the working group has prepared a report that considers both short-term budget solutions as well as the long-term role of Channel 35. In many cases, the recommendations are applicable to both short-term and long-term strategic challenges. Some recommendations can be implemented immediately with little or no impact on the general fund, and others represent long-term vision that will become possible as the city regains a stronger financial footing. So what I'd like to do is, in the PowerPoint, start flipping through some of these recommendations for you. So on the short-term recommendations, is that where we're at? Okay. This is not actually up anywhere, is it? It's just on paper? Okay, so we're on page 6. Yeah, that's the one. The first recommendation is actually listed second on here, but that's the Channel 35 should consider itself a multimedia government access content provider that has a cable channel as the backbone of one of its many media outlets. So I talked about that a little bit. I think I think informs really the entire basis of this report. Channel 35 should alter production guidelines to create content that can be utilized in both traditional cable TV and new media formats. Just a quick statistic for you. Pew Internet Mobile Access 2010 study showed that 40% of adult cell phone owners now do web surfing, email, or instant messaging on their phones, up from 32% last year. The same study shows that 20% of adults now watch a video on their phones. These numbers are going up every day. So thinking about new ways we can distribute content and changing our production guidelines so that we can take advantage of that content is important. What that means is we can't air a 30-minute or a 1-hour show on someone's cell phone. They're just not going to watch it. But what we could be doing is looking at 1 to 5 minute content that's much more to the point, much more focused on specific information that people want and need, and be creating content like that. I think on the in terms of distribution, which is on next page, this opens up a whole new world of distribution for us. We can be distributing through cell phones, through YouTube, but we could also be distributing through taxi cabs or MTA bus lines. Why not be putting a 5-minute video or a 3-minute video on an issue important to the city up so when people are on the bus they can see that? We could be on LAX television screens, gas station television screens. These are all people who are looking for content, and why shouldn't we be the ones to provide to them some of that content that provides important information? This gets into the format change. A couple other ideas here that we've kicked around. We could go to 301. We could say, 301, what are the top 10 questions you're getting? and then we could create a 1 to 5 minute video to answer those questions. We could post that. It could be featured on the lacity.org website, or it could be on a YouTube channel, or it could be something that we could push out through subscription. We could ask departments their most frequently asked questions. We could create a Twitter feed that could provide live Twitter updates on council. So you could know what item we're on, and then when the item is concluded, what the vote was, and that goes out through Twitter. We can create highlights about LA tourism and trade. If we had a 5-minute video that we distributed about what was happening in LA that week, we could distribute that to LAX, to hotels, to taxis. These are people, and then it provides some real usefulness there. In my conversation with New York City media, they offered to do a content swap with us, where we could create content about some specific attractions in Los Angeles. They would create specific content about their attraction, and then we could switch, thereby, helping out tourism in both cities. The next page talks about developing guidelines for programming partnerships. And so we would be looking for professional partnerships around creating content. There are lots of professional independent studios out there who might be interested in creating content for the station. New York City does a TV pilot week where they work with one of the film institutes, and they actually air television pilots that were created by independent producers. We certainly have plenty of independent producers making TV pilots in this city. Sponsorship also, also on this page, page 10, consider rebranding ourselves away from just a cable channel to thinking of ourselves as the channel, the LA City Multimedia, LA City Media, or something like that. On page 11 here, if we were able to get original funding restored, our process should change so that we become much more directed in our programming. Because the way we operate right now is so client-driven, it's really catch as catch can. And it depends a lot on the media savvy of any given department or elected official. If you look at a distribution of who uses the channel, it's really maybe a quarter to a third of our departments really take advantage of the resource. And so they end up dominating our content. Whether or not the content that they want us to produce is what's needed or not, it doesn't even really come into it, because our mission is, as it stands now, is just if someone wants to produce something in the past, we essentially produced it. Really the official role of the policy board that I sit on is to make sure that no one individual is using the channel for their own ends exclusively. But other than that, we can make suggestions, but that's not really within our guidelines. But changing the operating guidelines so that we actually do have a much more directive role in programming, and if funding were restored, to actually have a program director position who could actually establish some priorities. Right now, the priority would be looking at creating jobs and finding job opportunities. If we had a program director, we might say, we should produce a half-hour special on workforce centers and where people could be getting jobs. Or at the council and the mayor establishing certain policy priorities, we could be creating content to support that. Or if there's new programming coming out, new city programs, something like that. Department of Building and Safety, very little utilization of our channel. But so much of the city, so much of our residents, they deal with the Department of Building and Safety. If we were able to look at the top 10 questions they get, it would be tremendous value to taxpayers if someone were able to pull the video and say, here's how I get a permit to do X. So those are just some examples, but that requires us as a channel and as a production facility to say we should be focusing on these particular areas. These are useful questions that people want answers to. Personally, I would like to see a 5-minute video on how much I have to clean things out before I recycle them, because my wife insists that they have to be spotless, and I insist that they don't have to be. But a 5-minute video on that, I think, would be really useful.
That's a perfect example of what it could be utilized for, especially when the public's in a quandary. What is the right answer?
Right, and if you can search, and we can make it searchable. So I could go in and type in, into the city website and say, recycling question, and this video would pop up, and it would start playing. Another thing we're talking about here is splitting the channels up. Right now, and this deal gets to this preemption question. Right now, because there's so much in the way of meetings happening, it's hard to establish when shows are on. We have an additional channel. And one of the outcomes of the report that Bitsy and MAPI put together was to have one channel, Channel 35, dedicated to as a government channel, really government meetings. And then channel 36 would be more lifestyle / kind of information channel. And that's where these other videos could air about city services, or, you know, if they're occasionally do documentaries or roundtables or talk shows and things like that, and those would be on those channels. Then you could actually tell people when the show was going to be on, and it would actually be on at that hour. So that's another piece. And then establishing benchmarks. There are so many free ways of getting benchmarks right now if we are fully utilizing the media available to us, the kind of Web 2.0 as they're known. Google provides free analytics for websites. You can see what the viewership looks like. There are other things we could put dislike buttons next to programming. And you can use this as a way to sort of filter. And if we have stuff that's web-only content, and all of a sudden it's got, 20,000 likes on it, well, maybe then our staff can take a look at that. And it's a free way of filtering this stuff that requires no staff resources. They can say, oh, this is what's rising to the top. Let's put that on the cable channel. Or let's feature it on lacity.org. Also, to the extent that we do continue client-driven production, we want to have marketing plans as part, promotion plans as part of that. For too long, I think we've had departments or clients come to say, I want to make this thing, and there's no sense of what it's going to be for, who the audience is going to be, and how they're going to promote it. And so that's, to me, that's not really a great use of taxpayer resources if we're saying we're just going to make whatever comes along. If nobody happens to watch it, oh well, especially if there was no effort. So that's certainly something we would like to see more of. And then let's see, on the page, which one is it? Well, starting to feed into the budget question. This will be a nice segue into your next item. But there's this 1%, PEG 1% money, which I think you're all familiar with.
For infrastructure.
For infrastructure, exactly.
What page do you on?
What page is the PEG 1% on? Does that make it in here? I'm sure that got into the recommendations section.
Page 9.
Page 9. Sorry, thank you. Right. So we have millions of dollars sitting in this infrastructure account. There's no reason why we shouldn't start utilizing that money today.
How much?
Several $million.
How many so?
$6 million a year.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, coming in. $6 million a year.
And we're currently spending $700,000 a year for capital expense for Channel 35 and Channel 36. So out of the $6 million, only $700,000 is spent
But it
annually.
What dictates that it can only be used for infrastructure? At what level of government was it dictated that it can only be used for infrastructure?
That's dictated by federal law.
Okay, not state law, federal law.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we'll get into a deep dive, really, when we go to the next agenda item, really discussing and fleshing out the dollar amounts.
Right.
But I think the point is really well taken.
Yeah, we have this money available. We should be spending it. Our lease runs out on our current Channel 35 facility in 2013. We should be building our new studio out using these funds. It prepares us for the future. It provides jobs for people right now. It's money that we can't spend otherwise that's just sitting in an account. We should be building out a studio that can help us prepare to do all the things that we want to do in this report. That helps us get set up so that there's appropriate computing infrastructure to create these websites, to provide content for them, really to have us on the cutting edge in terms of the way that we provide information, and it increases the transparency of government, and it gets more information. It allows the city government to communicate with its city much more effectively. Other things we can do with it: wire council committee rooms. We could all be on TV right now.
But paying for rent isn't considered infrastructure, correct?
I consider that would be an operating cost. Yeah.
However, if we use the money to buy a facility that's exclusively used for that purpose, is that considered infrastructure?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So we could use this. So we could use this 1% money that is approximately $6 million a year, and we actually haven't expended the money that we've received over the last few years. So what's the and I'll get to that. I'll repeat it. What's the balance of that 1% that is accumulated so far that we haven't utilized, roughly?
$6 million.
But if we're getting 6 million a year and we're only spending about 700,000,
It just started, I think.
We started collecting this fee in...
I thought we were 2 years into it.
Well, we started collecting the fee in 2008, but the current or incumbent operators weren't, which are the major players, including Time Warner and Cox, weren't obligated to pay that 1% until 2009.
2009.
Correct.
Okay. So we're in our second full year of it.
We're
right?
starting our second
Okay.
full year, yes.
All right. So of the first 6 million, we only spent 700,000. So it makes sense that now that we're already in the second year, and it appears that it will continue. So getting back to my point, Mr. Rosendahl, is if we were to use some of that only usable for infrastructure purposes, if we were to actually buy or create a facility just for that purpose, then that 1%, $6 million can be used for that building. The walls, the wiring in the walls, the bathrooms, et cetera, if it's only used for that, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Follow up when you go ahead.
so if that's the case, unless we can prove that we're actually fortifying ourselves with the right amount of infrastructure ongoing, and therefore we couldn't afford to create a facility or buy a facility specifically for that, then maybe that should be one of our considerations as well.
Absolutely. It's really the ongoing operational cost, which would be, I guess,
Salaries, things
Problematic.
of that nature. Uh-huh.
But, I mean, one other really interesting thing that we were able to get from the city attorney is we proposed that they should be thinking of the build-out of a website as a capital cost, because websites are infrastructure. The content is the operating cost, and so we have to have an opinion from the city attorney stating that we can do so. So we can actualize so much of this, what's in this report, and get everything teed up, and we have the funds to do it, which is what is really exciting to us. Building out a facility, purchasing a facility, building out a website. We think the time is now to start moving on some of that stuff. And as far as the operating costs go, I mean, we'll get into that with the 5-year budget, but we can sort of maintain where we're at, and we have plans for growth. So that's a good segue into the next item.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly open for additional questions.
Thank you very much. Before I forget this question, then I'll go to Mr. Rosendahl. So if we were to have a facility exclusively dedicated for this purpose, and the facility in and of itself, we could pay with the 1% funds for that facility, how about maintenance of that facility?
maintenance would not be an eligible cost from the 1% fee.
Even
It
if
has-
the facility was actually purchased exclusively with that money?
Correct.
Now, remember, the maintenance isn't going toward content, it's not going toward filming, et cetera. It's going toward maintaining the actual structure.
Again, we're limited to capital cost use only
Yeah.
by federal law. So under generally accepted accounting principles, we would have to look at the particular use of the 1% fee for maintenance of the building, of the structure. If it's
Now-
normal maintenance costs, by the way, under GAAP, are not permitted costs for and are limited to operational expenses.
Okay.
But if it's for the maintenance and extension, and there's the key, to extend the life of the facility, so we need a new roof, for example, that would be a capital cost.
Got
We
it.
need new plumbing, that's a capital cost.
But not sweeping and mopping.
On a repaint.
And-
Repainting, things of
That's
that
correct.
nature. Okay, now how about when it comes to the difference between purchasing equipment and then us taking over the maintenance in-house versus leasing equipment for 5 years, which includes a maintenance agreement exclusive to that company that sold us and maintains the equipment?
Again, under GAAP, you would need a 10-year time frame for any of the leased equipment or facilities
For useful life.
for useful life. So 5 years would not be the key, you need 10 years. And as you know, for equipment changes out all the time.
It changes over far
Right.
sooner than 10.
But we can use the 1% under GAAP to provide not just for maintenance costs, but maintenance costs that extend the life of the equipment. So if we upgrade the equipment, or we do something to tweak the equipment so that it extends the warranty or whatever, so it would be the life of that equipment, then we would be okay under GAAP. And so we'd have to look at each purchase as to whether it would be better to do a lease or to do an outright purchase.
Okay.
under the 1%. What we want to do is avoid, by the way, and we'll get into this in the next
Item.
we want item is, but this is a good part because we're talking about use for Channel 35, their strategic plan, is that we want to avoid any objections from the cable operators, so that they try to deduct any monies that are owed the city under the 1% obligation that they have to the city.
Mr. Rosendahl, Councilman Rosendahl.
First, Mr. Cardenas, I appreciate your flexibility in your creative thinking, because that's what we have to do, and I appreciate your creative thinking about how the channel should become part of the new social network and the new media and all that stuff is really good. But let me just get some clarity here. We had a 5% franchise fee, then we got an additional 1%. That was not a federal law. That was the boys in Sacramento cutting the deal with AT&T and the others who didn't want to do franchising that I went through for 22 years. And so they cut the deal with the legislature. The legislature then had the cable operator walk in the room and said, me too, me too, me too, rightly so, because why should these guys get a special deal? Which they did. They saved hundreds of millions of dollars, AT&T and Verizon and the others, and going out and hustling their product and getting cities to get involved in all that. I mean, that's the fact. So they gave a 1% back. That was a state money. So there's a 5% franchise fee and a 1% additional fee, which was the way the telecommunication folks got into the cable business. It was a cheap hit, and everybody loved it in those industries, believe me. I can tell you. I was out of the industry at that point, but it was obviously what happened. So this is not a federal thing, if we're talking about that 1%, correct? Okay.
That's correct. You're absolutely right.
All right, so we're looking at $25 million, which was roughly the 5%, and now a fresh 5 or 6 million, which makes it the 6%. So you get a total theoretical budget for, I might say, government, public access, and community access. Public access is a vital part of this, as government access is, in terms of the commitment to the electronic soapbox and the people's right to use it. So theoretically, that's what happened. And tell me if my history's wrong, because you guys have been here, and my colleagues if it's wrong. Somebody down the road decided that this Channel 35, 36, and PEG channels and all of that could survive on less. So the council either took a motion or they did a policy decision, and they made some arbitrary number. Oh, we'll give you 40 cents in every dollar, and the other 60 cents we're going to put in a general fund. Even though knowing a cable customer, because that was the world, that was supposed to all go to cable money. And the city had no right to do it, and I think they did an illegal act, and they're still in an illegal mode, because that was franchise money, not everybody else's money.
Can we get into that discussion on item 2?
But just so that you know, the flexibility of that 1% capital dollars is a state thing, and the more flexible we can be, obviously, the more effective I want that 1% to be.
But the state chose to adopt the federal interpretation of capital improvement, et cetera, right?
Yes, and you're both right, because essentially what the state did is they hamstrung us to the use of that money. They could have negotiated that up to 1% be negotiated locally. But they said, no, this is the obligation of the cable operator, and it will no longer have, going forward, upon the enactment and applicability of the law, once you get a state franchise, will no longer have the obligation of providing PEG access facilities, which is what we had before.
Okay. Thank you. And we're going to get deeper into that 60-40 in a minute. Okay. Thank you very much. We're going to go to public comment on item number 1. Please, we have Leslie Dutton. Yeah. Over here at this end, Leslie. We saved the spot for you. Doesn't have your name on it, but welcome.
Well, the reason I'm here today is to tell you that there are a lot of folks that would have liked to have been here. However, we were not made aware of the meeting until just a couple of hours before it began. The Public Television Industry Corporation was formed as you were holding your initial meetings on what to do back in 2008. And prominent people from throughout Los Angeles area, businessmen, Hollywood producers, public access producers, all felt very strongly that the public needed a channel and the public access needed to continue so we could have a community dialogue. I'm here today to ask you to postpone taking any vote or any action until the representatives from the public access producer community and the businessmen and Hollywood individuals that are concerned about free speech in Los Angeles can be here to be a part. What I'm hearing today and what I'm reading and learning for the first time is a very important decision for the future of Los Angeles, and the public should be included on it. And many of the people involved in the Public Television Industry Corporation want to work with you and want to work a solution and support you, and we want to be a part of it, and that's why I'm here. So I ask you, if you would please let me know before the next item comes up whether or not you would consider postponing it until the community can become a part of this discussion and be a part of supporting the ultimate plan.
Thank you. What you're commenting on right now is item number 1. I think your request probably applies more to item number 2. Item number 1 is a report from the Municipal Access Policy Board, and the recommendation of the chair of this committee and likely the chair of the Budget Committee is to note and file that report, so that doesn't mean we've taken any actions of expenditures or bifurcating accounts or what have you.
Okay, as long as I wanted you to be aware that we care and we want to be a part of the process and a part of the community discussion.
As usual.
I
Thank
still want to talk on
And I'll call you up on item number 2 as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Any more questions on item number 1? Yes, Mr. Zhang. I'm sorry, Chairman.
Oh, the $27 million is what we're getting in the revenue? And as more
Total.
people go to Dish and the other access, we don't receive anything on those?
That is correct. The current franchise, the state franchise, does not allow for us to take any revenue for, franchise fee revenue for satellite providers.
And what happens when we see fewer subscribers? And are we seeing a reduction in transferring over to the other?
I'll let my colleague, William Imperial, respond to that, but we have actually seen a reduction in subscribers for the cable franchise areas. We've actually seen an increase in revenue, though, in the service money that's collected. So expanded services have been acquired by the subscribers, and as a result, the net has been pretty flat.
And have we audited those dollars?
Yes, we have.
Audited from the cable companies?
Yes, we have. In fact, we have outstanding audits right now.
Are they compliant?
Pretty much.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. I
So
mean,
if you can explain the difference, because I know a lot of people are going to the new other technology.
well, here's the rub. You've got new technologies, but you've also got people that do not want to give up their cable. And the numbers as they go back and forth from cable to satellite and no pay TV, if you want to just call it both industries pay TV,
Rabbit ears?
and you want to go to rabbit ears, people will do that temporarily.
As well as even now younger viewers even viewing their web content or their television content through the web.
The web, which we don't receive anything for that.
That's correct.
Correct.
So we can't anticipate this revenue continuing to flow at the present rate as we have fewer subscribers?
Well, here's the second portion of that in response to your question, is that as the rates of programming go up, even if cable subscribers in the city are bled off to wherever they're going to go, that difference, for example, $3 a month,
Right.
will actually escalate what our collections are unless there's a true, real bleed-off of cable subscribers in LA, which we don't foresee in the near future. Cable's TV is doing a real good job of making a run at their competition with satellite right now. They're trying to add TV to your smartphones. Comcast and Time Warner announced an agreement today, just before I came to this meeting, that they're going to start trying to push content over the smartphones as an added bonus to your cable subscription. So these are the things that are going on. We can't tell you where it's going to go. Nobody has that magic ball, but as people stick to their technologies, we don't see a rapid rise in cable rates, but we don't see a dramatic drop either at this point in time.
And one of the other differences, Councilman, that we're also seeing is with now the state franchise being in place, we also have more competition taking place amongst, quote, cable TV providers, because we previously had a cable, with the city franchise, we had a provider that was responsible for a specific geographic area, franchise area within the city. Now with the state franchise, we've got multiple providers that are able to provide service in some areas. For example, we've got the previous incumbent, Time Warner, that has pretty much coverage throughout probably 80% of the city, and then we've got now new players that have come into play, AT&T and Verizon, that have their own products, which are also competing with the Time Warners that are providing service out there. So we've got multiple providers that are providing revenue on the cable franchise side.
And is that $6 million been normally what we would generate for the
2 years in a row.
Well, again, that's tied to just the new fee that we're starting to collect, so it's been pretty steady.
What did we
because
see, what did we see prior to that? Dollars?
We did not. There was no obligation by the cable operators to provide any payments to the city, public educational and governmental access.
So just the access, and then that was restricted, or shall we say,
If we're talking about before state law or after state law?
before state law?
Before state law, the only there was no 1% fee, by the way. There was no obligations to the
But did
city.
we
5%?
charge something for digging in the streets?
Except for the 5%, by the way.
Okay.
It was the 5% fee, and then under the city franchise, the other thing that they were doing is we had some in-kind services that they provided, and they had public access facilities throughout the city
Right,
that were
people would
operational.
utilize that, which is what Ms. Sutton was referring to.
Yes.
Yes.
But when we talk about free speech, the free speech, someone's paying for that free speech.
That is correct.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing's free. But also, one of the things, according to your answer, and then I'll go to Mr. Parks and then Mr. Rosendahl, according to your answer, William, that even though the number of subscribers that are contributing to that 1% is going down, it seems like the people who are still subscribing somehow must be paying more per prescriber on average, because the amount isn't going down with the number of subscribers going down.
That is absolutely correct. In fact, there's been a rate increase over year of about $3 a sub.
Exactly.
Per month, by the way.
Which the loudest argument that was being made to Sacramento, and then eventually from the actual policymakers in Sacramento, the loudest argument that was being made was, this is going to create more competition, therefore the consumer, the subscriber, is going to pay less for the services. But it doesn't appear that supposed competition is reducing the amount that the consumers, our constituents, are actually paying on a consumer per consumer basis.
That's correct.
I just wanted to, and I know Mr. Rosendahl doesn't agree with this, but I just wanted to make sure it's clear that other than the 1%, that money that's come to the city has always been viewed as general fund. The 60/40 was the council figuring what was fair. What went haywire is when there was a budget crunch, the council took part of the 40 consistently. That's why when we talked about it in the budget, because again, we don't know whether the 40 is adequate or more than adequate, because we've never been given a chance to use the 40. So that's why we talked about having a 5-year proposal to say, if you were able to keep your money, just as what we're trying to do with the libraries, if you were able to keep your money and you had a multi-year program, you could plug in these needs, as opposed to getting your 40% July 1st and it becomes 38% July 2nd, and by December it's 10%. That's been the shortfall. And so I think it's always been considered general fund because it came, another thing is, I think when you go to other cities, their public access is to whatever their imagination is. And if they choose to have a very limited imagination, it could be a camera in the back of the city council that says, you know, you can come and speak your mind. And so it's there is no guidelines on what public access is. We have chose to go in a very elaborate manner, and I think our public access, to me, is even the stuff that the city clerk does. I think that's a vital part of public access, so people can get our council files and understand what we're doing, our meetings. So I think that is part of the annual budget, so that we're not telling the city clerk, you can't do your job well because we can't fund it. And by moving those funds out of the general fund, it gives everybody ability to say, we have a program that's going to be sustainable. And again, we may find out, I don't know yet, but whether, if allowed to do your job over a period of time, you may find that the original concept of 40% may not have been necessary. It could have been a lot less if you're able to build and sustain as you went forward. Now, the one thing I think that as we look at infrastructure in the future, I don't know whether it is in our interest to build the studios as we've had them in the past, particularly with the technology of getting even better cameras that you can carry in your pocket, and people can take film almost anywhere. So I don't know whether that expense, where we tried to co-locate them, and what we found is that some groups monopolize them, and very few folks citywide or generally in the community use it. You had a handful of people that it was their studio. So I think in the future, as we look at that, our infrastructure and access has to be much more mobile and flexible and nimble, as opposed to come to this structure and then it's going to become somewhat of a logistical nightmare to keep track of the equipment if you loan it out and things like that, maintenance. But I would think that if we can ever get our arms around what it really costs to do a Cadillac job, a reasonable job, and then begin to say, what path are we going to take? But I think the biggest shortfall has been the inability to allow the department to run its functions over a budgetary year. So if you know that I'm going to get funding 2, 3, 4 years in a row, you're going to make decisions differently than, I got it this year, I may lose it, let's encumber it. I mean, which is all the games that get played when you know the Grim Reaper's coming. So that's what I think that we have to come up with what's hoped is a figure that we can all live with and then leave it alone. And say, with limits, you have the ability to have a multi-year budgeting process, but you can't look up one day and have $50 million in the budget and not have used it. So, but I think that's what I would like to see as we move forward, that we look at what are our real public access features in the city? How do we get them maintained? How do they not become subject to the whims of the budget each year? How do you have a multiple year approach to it?
On that note, you just caused me to ask a third infrastructure question. Can the 1% be used for infrastructure if we were to go ahead and move to a mobile unit?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we could use that to fund the buying of a mobile van, so to speak. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
But many cities are using that 1% for that purpose, by the way.
But who would pay for the Teamster driver? We couldn't pay for the Teamster driver with that 1%, right?
That's correct.
That's operating costs.
That's correct.
And that would come out of the 5% if, in fact, you were to say they could have X dollars of the 5%.
Well, it's really not 5%. We bled down that 5% for this purpose down to 15%.
Yeah, but know this, just to give you another scope. Bernard, when you say access, there's government access, there's community access and public access. It's called PEG. And if any government bureaucracy here has good information to share, which I like all your technologies of the new medias in doing that, obviously that's government access. And that more effective, more new technology, more familiarness with all the new day would be ideal for government to do that. And for them to come up with a program that makes sense like that would also be very good. And programming itself, which is what he was talking about, we should, as policymakers, have some role in it. For instance, do you still have classic arts on the channel? Okay. Well, classic arts, the guy died a long time ago. I'm the one who put it on your channel. I put it out throughout the whole city. And it's a couple of 3 minutes of different kinds of music stuff, and then it moves on to other stuff. And that was a decision that the government made here to use their government channel to do that. Okay, that was a government decision at that particular point. But historically, government access is government access, community access, and then public access. My big question is the revenue streams from AT&T and Verizon Are they real, and are they giving us 6% of their new customers' revenue? And we feel comfortable about that. That's one of the reasons why our monies aren't going down, is because when people go to AT&T or go to Verizon, they're still paying that 6%. So that competition, Mr. Cardenas, about the different players in it, on that level was great, but not pricing. They just all jack their prices up, and it's all a joke about best for the customer, which those of us in the industry knew that was a good way for AT&T to get out of all the real realities that I had to deal with. But I'll say really more discussion for the second point than the first. But do you go to the council and give us your thoughts about programming, or you guys just make those decisions? What role does the council or the mayor play in what ends up on the channel, on Channel 35?
Right. Well, the short answer is no. The long answer is the way this works is when there was funding to actually create original programming, we, the Municipal Access Policy Board, we get together quarterly. Departments, office of elected officials would submit programming or production requests to the channel. We get a list of all the programming requests. They come up and we say, what do you want to put on? And they say, well, we want to do a show about aging in Los Angeles. All right, sounds good. Check. Somebody comes up and says, we want to do a documentary on the Watts Towers. All right, we've got the money. Check. After sitting through, the council, if your deputy happened to say, we want to make a show about Council District 11, then you would have that say in your programming. We would produce that program. Otherwise, it's all just we collect the operating guidelines approved by the council in 1989 or whatever it was for clients bring it, as long as it conforms to our programming guidelines, it has something to do with the city, and no one's using it to their own nefarious purposes. We have the money, we make the show. Maybe Tony disagrees with me about this, but the other thing that happens is we get last-minute programming requests for like a parade that's happening. And so we, as a board, have delegated some of these programming decisions to Tony and the station to say, okay, if there's a time-sensitive request that comes in, it conforms to guidelines, you have the discretion to say, yes, we'll do it, or no, we don't. More often than not, if there's an event happening, LA This Week would cover it, or we might send them to cover the parade, or whatever it is that was happening. So that's how content decisions were made. There was never the board reporting to the council or the council coming to the board. My point here is that's not so good, as it turns out, because you end up with this hodgepodge of programming by whoever has decided that they want to make a show. So as a group, what we came up with was, if we have somebody tasked, whether it's this board, the policy board, ideally it would be a program director or the program station manager, who's able to say, I'm tracking what's going on in the city. These are some of the major issues in the city today. Programming board, these are my programming priorities for this quarter or this year. Let's start making some shows around this stuff. I think we get a lot more value, and we get away from, I think, frankly, is a reputation for having a hodgepodge of shows. So
I agree with you, and I think that's a good challenge for us as we go forward.
Mm-hmm. And the only additional thing I'd like to add on the funding side is, as Andrew had mentioned, the review of the content that departments provided was prior to budget reductions that were taken in 09-10. So now the Channel 35, their primary objective is coverage of city council meetings and 5 commission meetings. Any original programming is really, at this point, very, very minimal. So the requests that used to go before the board for the funding that they would oversee, that money is gone. So what we're really talking about with this new model in terms of being more directed and strategic in directing content development is if in the future we're able to bring in additional monies to the channel for development of original content.
What I liked about your creative thinking, Andrew, there also was the eyeballs that are connecting to what we provide as a service, be it the video on a cable channel, or be it on your smartphone, or be it on whatever social media you're into, the twitting and all that. That's so exciting that you're going to reach out beyond the traditional folks who turned on Channel 35, and you will impact in a very positive public service way a lot of the real issues that people need to connect with. So I'm excited about it, and I really think your committee, since you're over charge of the whole thing, should have a part of your committee dealing with the programming content aspects of Channel 35 from a government perspective. That'd be my suggestion.
Generically, yeah, but I personally don't want to be picking what's going to be on Friday at 3 o'clock. I'll leave that up to people who are better suited for that. But as far as guidelines, absolutely, that needs to be vetted through the policy, and then after that, the day-to-day folk take care of that. Tony, did you want to say something?
I just want to add, up to now...
Full name and title for the record.
Tony Agani, Station Manager, Channel 35. Up to now, the programming content was primarily a shared responsibility with you guys and our city departments. We wanted you to think about your needs and your outreach needs, your video needs. What we're suggesting in this report is we need to shift that around and have the board and the staff be more directing some of that programming. And as a matter of fact, the board has been very instrumental for the past several years in terms of commissioning those types of programs. For example, LA This Week. This is a weekly program. We take your press conferences and releases. We try to give it as much coverage as possible.
Council discussions as well, committee discussions?
Absolutely. Town hall meetings. These are content that I think is really critical for 35, and they are really inexpensive to produce, by the way. So we're looking for that partnership to increase, but again, with having the board give us a little bit more latitude to commission content that serves the city as a whole. And in addition to content, by the way, just so you all know, 35 services is beyond just programming content. We provide internal support services for production, council phone, dubbing. There's a whole host of other services that we try and, again, accommodate.
And Channel 35's budget has been going down.
Well, this past couple of years especially, our staffing took a hit, about 50% full-time staff, and our programming dollars went from 1.2 million to about 200,000, so $1 million reduction.
Yeah.
Just one final, on the cost for production. I was informed that if we want to do a program, we need to help absorb the cost for that. Is that still the case?
It depends on when the request is for. If it's during normal business hours, we try our very best to send the city staff to cover it and absorb the cost as part of our normal operation. If it happens to be an off hours or weekend,
Or during council meeting.
right, or the staff capacity has reached, then we have freelance contractors, as you know, which we hire for that one job, couple $100 to send the shooter to the event.
But with council meetings, those are done,
Those are all staff coverage.
and
Yeah,
that's routine, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday.
that's correct. That's part of
In the
our,
regular budget.
that's part of our mandated programming of our 12 remaining staff members.
So the way the budget is now, we have no budget for original programming anymore. All we've got is basically the bare minimum to allow us to cover 5 commissions and council. And then there's a little bit of extra time here and there, and where we can accommodate folks in that here and there, we do, with staff
But
time.
it's kind of lean.
But prior to 2008, we had the budget for the original content, and that was when people would make requests, and we would say, sure, we'll make that.
Many departments are coming to us with their own funding because they know there's no way they're going to get better production rates and services than 35 if they want to outsource this to a commercial production. A show for LAWA may cost 10 grand for us to produce. Outside, it'll be 50, 60 grand. So
Thank you. But that's no way to run any department, just on a spotty contract out basis. It's still not an efficient and appropriate way to run any department, to hope that you get a 10,000 contract here, 10,000 contract there.
yeah, we really, when it comes to mandated content, that being council meetings, the commission meetings, we really need the regularity and expertise of city staff. We cannot be dependent on contract performances because it's inconsistent, they change every couple of years, so it's just not the way to
Or
run it.
what if a contractor is not available? Or you go down
Exactly.
through your contractor list and they're not available?
Correct.
Then you don't have an option to not cover one of your
We do
basic
not have that option.
responsibilities.
Right.
You don't have that option.
No.
And on the council coverage, just as a point of pride, when I did visit New York City, our meeting coverage is light years ahead of where New York is in terms of our ability to do a live simulcast of what's going on in council. They have to wait like a few days. And
They got New York One, though. They got their own station.
New York One is different. It's different. There's New York City Media, which is the city media property. New York One is actually the cable station there runs New York One. So this is right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For-profit.
So this is it's different. But the New York Media they do a lot of great stuff with New York Media, and they have landline. They have over the air stations. They've got radio and cable, and they're doing some really cool lifestyle stuff that I think was a good example of where we want to go. But as far as our meeting coverage, we're way ahead.
Thank you.
Let me ask you, as you've looked at the city, are there facilities or departments that have adequate media space? I mean, when you talk about finding a space for 35, 36, are there departments that have grown up in this whole business and have access and use their space, or that you could end up co-locating or something like that?
Well, it's funny you should ask. We did find a location that we have our eye on in the old Children's Museum in the LA Mall, which is currently a city property. Now I know the city attorney, I think, was using it for consent decree related stuff, but it seems like they may be wrapping up there, and so that's a space that would make a lot of sense for us to repurpose for what we're talking about.
But I'm talking about, is there departments that have media?
Oh, their own media. Well, LAPD does.
I mean, have we looked at those? I mean, how do they function? How do they function maybe differently than 35, 36? Things of that nature, in the sense of looking at where we get some synergy if there are stations and facilities that are doing it department by department.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, Councilman. LAPD and Public Works, they have small production facilities.
Besides LAPD?
Public Works.
Photo sound unit.
I'm sorry?
The police department, TV photo sound unit.
That's right. That's right. Their facilities are primarily geared towards internal type of training video, not necessarily the caliber of equipment is for broadcast, but we have partnerships and productions with both those departments.
The other department, I didn't hear you.
Public Works, they have a small video unit. I'm not sure about LAPD, LA Fire Department. They may, at one point, they may have had it. But again, we have looked towards co-productions with those facilities. But when it comes to studio space to produce content, interview shows, they're just not set up to do that for many technical reasons.
The other thing I was going to ask you, have we considered, if we have the 1% that we deal with infrastructure and we're looking at creating that infrastructure for the city, that whether we would be in better shape, or at least a portion of our product is produced by private or nonprofits, as opposed to our having to produce everything that we put on our channel?
That's actually in the report, is that we make the suggestion that we should be partnering with private producers in certain cases. We do, yeah. I think we have in the past. We absolutely do. But look, if we could get an independent producer who was going to produce a series of shows, about what's going on in LA this week. I mean, if they can do it better and more economically than we can do it, then I think that's something that we're open to.
But do we have any idea in the sense of percentage? I mean, is our goal to be 50% that we produce, or has any thought been given to what we would make available if private entrepreneurs and people were available?
Prior to the cutbacks that we, a couple of years ago, our percentage was roughly 80% city-produced, and 20% of our content that aired on 35 was submitted from outside other municipalities and nonprofit, as long as that content met the policies of the city and was appropriate for LA City View 35. And then a city department or elected official would have to sponsor that show. Under the auspices of that department would air that show. That percentage, obviously, because we don't have as much content that we produce ourselves, is closer to 50-50 right now. And I'll be quite honest, lots of repeats.
Is there a sense of what's ideal?
We've never been deliberate about trying to decide that. I think if we were to go further down this path, I think we could have that discussion as a programming board in terms of what makes sense. But yeah.
And one of the things that we also, as part of the recommendations of the strategic plan for 35, is that we also leverage, as you're saying, Councilman, we leverage internal resources in city departments and elected offices, because there's staff within those offices who are media savvy and savvy with the new types of technologies, where, for example, in both your district, Councilman, in CD6, your staff are developing video content that you put on your website, and some of that content, much of that content, we actually publish on Channel 35 on the cable station. And so we're looking to partner also to be able to do a kind of a hybrid approach where larger productions that might be, you know, roundtable discussions and some more intricate types of things we'll do centrally in 35, but we also want to leverage the resources in departments, so we take that content and get it out on both the web as well as out on the cable station, and that gives us a much broader base of content that we can air about city government.
And I propose training even for us, curriculums that we can help train those staff members that are interested to start producing and editing their own content. We can help provide some of that training.
I think as a multimedia production center, I mean, if we can help a public information officer become a better communicator for their department, that's a big service that we can provide, and we have a bunch of people sitting around. I mean, not sitting around; they're busy. But I mean, a bunch of people who are there who have this expertise, and you know, if there's enough demand for it, why not help train individuals to be, you know, better communicating using some of these avenues?
I believe there's so much untapped content that the city can produce, given the right resources. That Councilman Parks, I think being able to do 100% of content ourselves would be an easy task if you had the resources. The committee meetings that we've talked about, having them produce content, Public Works Chamber, many worthwhile events are held there. We can capture them at no cost to the city.
Thank you. So at this point, I'd like to once again thank the MAP board for your report. Really appreciate it. Andrew, please take that back to your colleagues.
Okay.
And tell them that we appreciate all of your volunteer work and the hard and good work that you've been doing. So
Thank you
very
for your
much.
consideration.
So with that, on item 1, we'll note and file that item. And we'll go to item number 2.
The Information Technology Agency has submitted a report relative to a 5-year development account budget plan for Channel 35's strategic plan.
Good afternoon, council members. Mark Wolf with ITA. This item, the genesis of this item was really twofold. There were two major drivers. Last spring in Budget and Finance Committee during the budget deliberations, there was a request by Budget and Finance Chair to come back to this committee to discuss a 5-year plan that would basically lay out a vision of how the TDA funds could be spent on an annual basis going forward. And again, this would be with the assumption that we would be able to take advantage of a greater percentage of the 40% funds that are currently targeted for the TDA funds. So that was the primary driver that we originally began this effort of preparing this report back that's before you. This second piece, the second prong to that, really relates to the previous item that was before you that relates to Channel 35's strategic plan. Channel 35's strategic plan is a multi-year plan that lays out a strategic vision for how to transform Channel 35 and government access in the city of Los Angeles. The underpinnings of any vision is an actual budgetary plan that can operationalize that vision. And that really is the second objective of the plan that we have before you, the TDA 5-year budget proposal. Before we begin the content of the discussion, I'd like to just to level set to bring you to page 3 of the PowerPoint. And this is just a level set to show you that for the 40% funds that are allocated to the TDA, back in 1985, the city admin code was originally modified to include language in it for the operation of the cable or for the collection of the cable franchise 5% fees. In 1995, when ITA was formulated, where portions, the telecommunications department, which was a separate department, was combined with ITA. At that time, there was a change made to the admin code that's shown to you, the language on page 3 of the PowerPoint. But basically, you can see that the admin code 5.97.1 says that expenditures may be made from the telecommunications development account only for public access, educational access, and government access programming and other telecommunication uses in the city. So this was kind of the legislative intent for the usage of the 40% funds that were directed for the telecommunications development account.
City Council of LA legislative intent, right?
That is correct. This was the Los Angeles City Council's direction. So I just wanted to lay that down as foundation for you, and now if I could have you advance to page 16 of the PowerPoint.
Back to the PowerPoint?
Yes, page 16 of the PowerPoint. Slide 16, excuse me. Slide 16, again, is kind of a foundational piece, and we had some discussion about this when we were discussing item number 1. This portrays these two pie charts before you. One shows the 5% fund, which we talked about is $27 million annually, and the second is the 1% fund, which is approximately $6 million annually. If you look at the 5% pie chart, you'll notice the 60-40 split. That's $27 million being split, 40% being directed to the TDA, and 60% when the monies come in go directly to the general fund. The important point to make here is that the usage of these TDA funds, or excuse me, the usage of these franchise fees, the $27 million, is a policy decision for the LA City Council and the mayor. This is something that is within your direct control. The 1% fee, however, is monies that we get, again, through the state franchise, but the usage of those funds are controlled by federal law. Federal law restricts the use of these 1% funds to be, as we said, capital cost only. So this shows you just kind of the big picture view of the monies that come in. If you advance to the next slide, on slide 17, this gives you a big picture view of the historical spend for the monies that come from the franchise fees. And I'd like to direct your attention to the first column that shows fiscal year and the last column that shows you the percent that goes to the actual percent spend of the TDA. In 2008-09, with the 40% monies that come in, only 26% was actually spent, were allowed to be spent, and that was for the operations of Channel 35.
But the thing is, you're accidentally arguing against yourself when you say 40% and then 26% of that 40%. You really should also break it down for us and show us what percentage of the total ended up being used for TDA purposes. Do you get what I'm saying? Because now you're talking minuscule.
Yeah, actually, it's 26% is actually of the 100% of the money.
Yes.
That's the real amount that's actually spent on TDA purposes.
So in 08-09, it was 26. In this fiscal year, it looks like the one that we're in right now, it looks like it is minuscule down to 14%.
That is correct.
Just a point of order, and I'm never going to say it again. I think what the city did in the 80s, and it does not have the right to take any of this money, 60-40. This was, I know, I'm from the industry, and I lived it for 22 years. It was to go to the operating of PEG access. City Council overruled itself, and I think violated the law. And I think what we've done is wrong. It's the last time I'm going to say it, because I can tell you I get nowhere with it because of everything else we're dealing with. But now that you're at your 40% or not 40% or whatever, these are the games we're playing now. And the question is really going to be for us, do we believe in public educational government access? And if we do, what percentage of that revenue stream coming in from these different groups, cable customers and the telephone companies, be it the 6% that adds up to a gross of 31 million or whatever it is, how much will go toward creating quality product on government channel and all of its new social media days, and how much will be allocated for the public access right for the electronic soap opera? You can do whatever you want because we're in where we are, but I'm not going to say it again in any of the committee meetings, but I think what the city council did in taking 60% violated the law, period. And if somebody really wanted to sue the city, maybe they would win that in a court case, but it probably wouldn't. Nobody wants to do it.
Thank God I don't think they would win.
That's it.
Thank God I don't think they would win, but, and I don't, you're not a lawyer and I'm not a lawyer,
No, but
but
I'm just going on my history and my respect for what the industry did way back when I created those channels, 35 and 36, among other things,
see,
but
that-
that's another day.
that's why
That's actually history.
That's why everybody needs to know in this democracy, intent and the law are two different things. So that's why when you want something for intent, put it in the law. Don't shake hands anymore. Doesn't work. So continue, please.
Okay, if you go to the next slide, that's titled 5% fee and proposed budget. This is a high-level look at the expenditures that we're proposing for a 5-year plan. And the 5-year plan would begin in fiscal year 11-12 and span through fiscal year 15-16. What we have done for the first fiscal year of the plan, 11-12, is you'll notice that the percentage in the far right column, it went from 14% to 25%. What I'd like to point out to you is that this increase, the 11% increase from the current fiscal year, is actually as a result, we have 21 positions in the city, of which the majority are in ITA, 19 of those, and 2 of them in city clerk, that support government access. And they support government access with web content publishing, with web applications for accessing council content for like council file index, council file management system. They support city council and government access for access to the on-demand access and live streaming content through like the Granicus web services. So what we've done this first fiscal year is we said, why don't we take credit for, instead of paying for these positions today out of general fund, why don't we redesignate those as TDA positions? Because that's really what they're doing and what they're supporting. So in the end, it's cost neutral to the city, but yet it will increase the percentage to show you that instead of spending in the previous slide 14% like we are in the current year, it would bring it up to show what we're actually spending with positions
So
to
in
25%.
the current year, that 11% is actually still being paid for what normally should be TDA purposes. It's just currently it's categorized differently.
That is
So
correct.
you're saying in the 11-12 year that we should categorize it more clearly and not only categorize it, but actually put it in its appropriate category for budgetary purposes, and then that would be a no net difference to the general fund between this current budget year and next budget year.
And that is correct, Councilman, because as we were developing this plan, we were very sensitive to the fact that the city is currently in a dire fiscal situation. So we certainly did not want to come back with a plan that was going to be a plan that would not be a realistic plan to go forward with. And there's still portions, as we talk about the different menu options a little bit later in this presentation, you'll see that these are really a la carte menu options, and we're really looking today from you for policy direction and input on these different options and what is priority to you. But if we go on to 12-13, we start, you'll see the percentage increases to 37%, all the way up to, in 15-16, to 45%. And I would say that the 45%, if you do the adjusted figure of really what it is, taking out those cost-neutral positions that we shifted over, the real percentage would be 34%. So we will have grown to 34% with the items that we were proposing in terms of additional investments using the 5% fund. And those investments we'll talk about in the next slide, but they include expansions of staffing resources in Channel 35 and Channel 36 to be able to support expanded content, expanded original content development. And in Channel 36, it'll also have additional staff to support a part-time public access facility that would be available to public access producers. And we'll talk again further into this presentation in more detail about this. But this gives you just the high-level overview of the 5% plan. If you go to the next slide, This shows you, we've had a lot of discussion about the 1% fee in the previous agenda item.
I have a question for cash flow purposes of understanding that. When it comes to the 5% and the 1%, in what increments does the city receive it? Does it receive it on a quarterly basis, an annual basis? Are they allowed to lag into next year? What's the
So
sort?
under state law, they have to, the cable operators, including the Verizon and AT&T, they call themselves video operators, they have to pay on a quarterly basis, 45 days after the end of each quarter.
For both categories, the 1% and the 5%?
That is correct.
And as far as we can tell, are they meeting that responsibility?
Yes, of course. We have not had any problems with the collection. We are right now in our 08-09 audits of the cable operators. So as soon as we learn more, we'll bring that to council, of course.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we go to the next slide, slide 19, the one titled 1% PEG franchise fee receipts and proposed budget. Here again, you'll see for the current year, for 10-11, the capital expenditure amount that's being currently expended from the $6 million that comes in is approximately $700,000, and that is capital monies that are included in both Channel 35 and Channel 36's budget for capital expenses. With our plan, you'll see that if you look at the total receipts of the monies that would come in over the next 5 years, if we wouldn't spend any of the money, the grand total would be $42 million sitting there. With the plan that we're proposing,
I have to ask you this question after what the governor announced a few weeks ago and continues to say the same thing as of yesterday. William, could the state, if we were to be silly enough to allow this money to grow to, say, 42 million or 25 million or what have you unused, could the state sweep that?
No. No, once it's received by the city, it would be the city's money. It's paid. The thing about franchise fees is they're paid for, and this goes back to 1984 with the Cable Act, it's paid for the use of the local rights of way. There's no ties to the state. The state could enact a law going forward, like they did in Florida and some of the other states, where going forward they could collect the franchise fees and remit maybe half back to the state. In fact,
they could actually pass legislation this year, effective, say, January 1st, if they didn't do it on an emergency basis, and come January 1st of 2012, any monies collected by this would actually go through the state, and then once they get their grubby hands on it, they could actually not turn over the entire amount. They could actually only turn over a percentage of that, and then we'd have to argue with them about whether or not it's constitutional or legal, right?
That's correct. The city enjoys some benefits because it's
Have they ever done anything like that in the past in the state of California?
It hasn't been.
No, not with this one.
Oh.
But have they ever done anything like that in the past on any accounts whatsoever, where it goes through their hands first and then they don't remit the entire amount back to the local government?
I'm not sure. You would know better than I.
No, the answer to that is yes, yes,
I know
yes,
it is.
yes.
I know it's yes, but you would know. You are a former state legislator. I'm sorry. Yeah.
okay.
Yes, they could, but we don't want to put that into our cable.
Oh, they're already thinking about it. Trust me.
Oh, I know.
Right.
I know.
So the capital investments that we're proposing, and we'll get into the details of what those are, but these capital improvements would allow us to implement some of the recommendations from the strategic plan at this time and without impacting the general fund, which I think is an important thing to note. If we go to the next page, this really lays out for you the a la carte menu options that we're putting on the table as ideas for the budget plan for use of the 5% monies. And the item number one, the positions, the 16 positions that are currently funded by general fund that we're saying fund by TDA, those are for positions that support web-based government access in ITA as well as telecom operations. The second item, item number two, is actually for expanding the capacity of Channel 35 with 13 additional staff. So this would bring them to a staffing level similar to where they were prior to the layoff of the staff layoffs that were taken in Channel 35, and it would allow them to, in addition to covering public meetings, they now would be able to also do original content programming again, and as Andrew has indicated, it could be done in a way where, again, it's more self-directed and strategic, where we're covering the hot topics that the city is faced with, as well as information about city services. The next item, item number 3, is for additional staff, 5 positions, of which 2 would be new staff to assist William in his operations for cable franchise regulation. William's operation prior to the state franchise at its peak had over 20 positions supporting cable regulation. We are now down to 1 position, William.
No, so William, let me ask you a question, so we can consider also when it comes to cost effectiveness. It appears that the positions in item number 1, the 16 positions, and in item number 2, the 13 positions, that's really adding value to our ability to serve the public with the purposes of public access, et cetera, content, things of that nature.
Government access.
Government access, thank you. However, when it comes to your department that is now down to just 1 person, you, the things that you engage in your day-to-day responsibilities, does that, or will that, if we continue to allow you to do effective work, and say we give you 2 more staff people, which at one time you had as many as 20, but say we grew it from 1 where you're at right now to 3, could that pay for itself in effect with the monitoring that you do, the lawsuits that unfortunately we have to get involved in, et cetera, and the settlements and or the cases that actually fall in our favor? Isn't that money well spent in that sense, in that you're not just spending money monitoring, we're actually being more proactive of making sure that dollars do come to the city that perhaps might not otherwise come to us if you're not able to be effective?
Yes, of course. If we had someone to go back to doing the cable complaint, for example, 1 person just to do the cable complaints, I mean, there has been a drop-off in all the cable complaints, but we consistently get 1 or 2 a week that need to be resolved, and we just don't have the ability to do that. Our 311 call center is understaffed, but yet they're doing their best to keep track of these complaints and to send them over to the cable operator that's responsible to handle that. But if we could do that, then maybe perhaps we could, again, re-implement the collection of fines or in-kind services that could be negotiated going forward with the cable operators. Because the cable operators, they want to be in compliance, by the way. I've been working with them for over 9 years, and so far I haven't met anyone who said, I don't want to be compliant with the law. They've all said, we will do what we need to do, and let us know what you need in order to make up for what we didn't do correctly, I should say. So, yeah, that would...
But they're not offering to fund positions for you.
No, we have not.
We have to do that ourselves.
We haven't made that offer to them either, because there could be some issues with regard to that would have to be vetted with the city attorney's office. But I don't know that they wouldn't do it, by the way. But under state law, they don't have that obligation.
They're not obligated to.
They're not obligated to do that.
So the last question on that is, of that $453,000, conceivably, we very likely would actually gain by our monitoring, et cetera, we would gain revenue that would very likely cover that 453, perhaps exceed it, looking at past history.
Yes. We, and I'm the only person that's doing it, but we have ITA has a responsibility. Our general manager has a responsibility of overseeing 20 private line telecommunication franchises in the city. They don't earn us very much, about $50,000 a year, but going forward, as people ask for these telecommunication facilities to be franchised by the city, there will be that opportunity. So we need investigations by our staff engineers. We have some staff engineers right now, 2 that work part-time with me, but that's way beyond what they're normally doing. But they do it because they have the experience and they've done it in the past. But they step out of their role.
But they're not specifically funded for that right now.
No, they're not. They were. One was TDA funded prior to the cuts, by the way, 1 staff position.
So option number 3, as you'll see, with the 5 positions, 2 of them are new staff, but 3 of them are actually existing general fund positions that we would also suggest be TDA funded as opposed to general funded. So those 3 positions would be cost neutral, and those are ones, as William was explaining, that support us for telecommunication franchises and cable clearances like the private line franchise work. Item number 4 is for utilizing the TDA fund to pay for, again, existing expense that's paid for today by the general fund for software maintenance for the software infrastructure that supports government access. And this is within ITA's budget. Item number 5 is for funding 2 positions that are currently funded by the general fund that are in city clerk's budget that support web-based government access. So again, these are the staff that are involved in supporting the council file management system as the umbrella system with, council votes that goes under there, the online access to the votes after, as well as some of the Granicus support, and so forth. So these are positions that, again, are doing government access work that are today funded by general fund that we would say, let's move those over to show those are funded by TDA. Item number 6 is for funding similarly in city clerk's area of responsibility. They're managing servers that have hardware, that have software maintenance that are required on an annual basis. So item number 6 is for supporting the work of the government access servers and infrastructure that they manage. And last, item number 7 is for funding 5 new positions for Channel 36, which would allow them to expand community and public access content, and it would also provide them operational support for a new public access facility, which we'll be talking about in the next slide. But it would allow them the capability to expand their content, which, similar to Channel 35, in the last 2 years where we've had significant budget cuts, they've lost half of their staff as well. So they're operating with a very bare bones operation as well. If we go to the next slide, slide number 21, titled 1% fee menu options capital, this is again the $6 million funding. As I mentioned, we're spending today about $700,000 between 35 and 36. Item number 1 on this menu option ties back to the strategic plan where we talked about upgrading the website for Channel 35 and lacity.org to be able to take advantage of the new technologies that are available and to really be able to put front and center multimedia content on the city's website, Channel 35. Item number 2 is for Channel 35 government access for a new studio. What we're proposing here is that the target for implementing a new studio...
Now, just to be clear, you're talking about the 1% on page 21. On
Correct.
page 20, you were talking about the 5%.
That is correct, Councilman. So item number 2, this new studio for Channel 35, what we would envision is that we would want to begin a process of hiring a consultant next fiscal year to do the design and planning for implementing a new studio in a city facility, and that year 2 and 3 of the plan, we would complete the build-out and construction of the new studio space. And again, we would like to take advantage of an existing city space. Ideally, we would like to locate it within the Civic Center complex to make it convenient for all the departments and elected officials who utilize the studio, as well as to make it convenient during the event of an emergency to be able to use it for emergency operations. The next item, item number 3 on the list, is a new public access studio that Channel 36 would manage. Item number 4 would be for a proposal to put in place video cameras in the council committee rooms. As you're aware, today we have audio coverage like today's meeting on the city's website, webcast. So here we would be putting in cameras in the committee rooms, which we would be able to then air that content, as opposed to audio, now have video content from committee meetings. Item number 5 on the menu is...
Page 21.
Yeah, page 21, the slide titled 1% fee menu options. Item number 5 on this menu would be for putting in cameras in the Board of Public Works room, which would not only allow us to have audio content like we have today for Board of Public Works meetings, but now we would be able to have live video content and archive video content for those meetings. In addition, as many of you are aware, the Board of Public Works room is used for many other city meetings, and so this would allow those meetings also to be aired with video content. And last, item number 6 on this menu option for the 1% would be for funding additional upgrades of the government access infrastructure that City Clerk manages for the services that we all utilize today that allow us access to council documents and so forth. So that completes the proposal for both the 5% and 1% items. We know that's a lot of information for you to consider, but what we really would like to, what we're really looking for is policy direction from you on the different options that we've put forward. Again, we realize the city's current fiscal situation, and we're cognizant of that, but we wanted to be able to respond back to your original requests from Budget and Finance Committee and come back to you with a plan that would take greater advantage of the TDA funds.
Can I add something here before we go to, you're taking this up and asking questions? One thing I'd like to add that is really important for you to know, currently Channel 35 is analog equipment based. It's not digital. We've been in the digital era for a few years now, nationally. Locally, right, we were part of that DTV transition work with the Federal Communications Commission, but yet our studio, our Channel 35 studio remains analog. It needs to be upgraded. So we talk about the Cadillac version or the Chevy version or the Volkswagen, I'm talking about old Volkswagen, by the way, version. We're in the old Volkswagen era still. I know I had a 71 Bug, by the way. But the bottom line here is that if you don't upgrade it, it's going to lead to more cost. That we could use the 1% PEG fee, but as the analog equipment is phased out, you won't be able to get equipment that will interface with our analog equipment. I know Tony Agani can go more into that, but eventually we're going to get there, and we're going to get there quickly. So we need to make a decision that you will know about that has to be financed just for upgrades. So you should upgrade the studio and hire the people to do that if you're going to do that. If you do it on a limited basis, we're just going to be on a patchwork basis, by the way, and that's not going to work going forward. Next 3 years, things will break down, your meetings won't go on. And also, by the way, you should know that even with our web infrastructure, we need an upgrade as well.
Okay. Now, to the department, to the IT department, if we made a motion today to have the department start putting together the plan and the implementation plan for the recommendations on the 1%, if we made a motion to do that, how soon could the department come back with the details of that plan? And you could break it up into components. Obviously, a facility, identifying a facility and securing a facility is different than starting to identify what is the potential cost of upgrading from analog to digital, et cetera.
If I may, we've discussed this. I think that what we would recommend is that you allow us to issue an RFP to hire a contractor.
In order to do what I just asked?
Correct. And we've got the money on hand to do that.
And we could use the 1% for that contractor, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, roughly what is that amount that we would have to clear for you in order for you to feel comfortable that you can get the adequate response in an RFP to the right kind of categorical contractor that you'd be looking for?
Can I just
Yeah, Tony?
clarifying this? The RFP for contractor or a project manager would be to develop a brand-new studio facility in a new facility. We do not recommend upgrading our current facility.
Correct.
And it's old. And
especially since we're renting it and the lease is up in 2 years.
So a detailed implementation plan, I would consider 60 days is probably reasonable for us to come back and report with that plan.
With the plan, or but William just talked about having the right kind of professional that we hire in order to give us the ultimate details of based on what we're explaining we're looking to do, what it would take to get it done.
an RFP would be a start to that process, yes.
Yeah,
So-
we would put together a comprehensive plan that would include all the steps and milestones that we would need to do and the projected time frame. We already know what our target end date is because
Yes.
we want to have this in place before the lease expires.
In 2013.
And we'd have all of the steps that would be required, including the RFP process. And I think we've got a lot of that information already that we've compiled, and I think part of that would be, we could actually, during that 60-day time frame, even begin the development of
Okay.
the RFP.
Then I'm going to instruct the department to prepare that relative to the recommendations on item 1, and to come to prepare that and come to the IT committee, and then also obviously subject to going to the budget committee as well when it comes to the 1% fund recommendations, but included in that, at that time when you report to the committees, to actually let us know if you've been able to identify what requests you're making on how much we should clear to go out to RFP to get the right kind of contractor.
We will do that.
I'm sorry, we had initially indicated that the contractor cost to do that work was $300,000, but probably your recommendation is better in the sense that we can probably look at this as putting it forward so that you know where we're going to go on a calendar basis with this work.
Exactly, and that's why I don't want to wait till after the budget process on the 1% items, because the 1% items do not interfere with the general fund budget process and special funds budget process, although they are intertwined when you look at the long-term commitment or the road that the policymakers, the council, is going to hopefully make at the same time and concurrent with the budget process about what our long-term intention is to make sure that we continue to have true public access. Within the city of Los Angeles, when every politician always used to talk about true public access, when the third parties were paying for it. Now that we've actually been collecting 1% and 5% for it, it appears that we don't seem to be as committed long-term to public access information. So I just wanted to make it clear that that is a policy decision of the council. We are being fortified with a 1% and a 5% amount of money, which is in the realm of $6 million a year on the 1%, in excess of $25 million a year in the other 5%. So the bottom line is this: if we truly are committed, I believe that it shouldn't take longer than this next 2-3 months for us to determine whether or not we're not going to be rhetorically committed, but we're actually going to be committed. We're going to wrap those dollars up. We're going to commit those dollars for this fiscal year coming up and for future fiscal years so that we can actually implement that commitment, not just pull back on that commitment and then not keep a commitment that we've all been talking about. I know I've been talking about it ever since I ran for office 14 years ago. It's just it was easier to talk about when somebody else was paying for it. Now that we've been charged with the money, now we have to put our money where our mouth is.
Yeah, I'd make a couple of quick comments. First of all, you did a great job in outlining where you want to take the future and how the money should be spent. But 2 questions, which are my public access questions, okay? Just for the public access. Back to page 20, where you say, item 7, new staff for Channel 36 for expanding community and public access original content and operational support for new public access facility. How would Channel 36, in this concept, because this is $700,000, and then you go to the next page, and it's $1.2 million for a studio, which is roughly $2 million altogether, that's for community and public access, which is Channel 36, which is a shared channel. For the public access producers who feel that the First Amendment right and electronic soapbox and people on the airwaves, that they need more clarity as to what the public access aspect of this is. Because if you take it seriously, PEG, government, educational, which is really your community channel, and 3, public. Public, historically, when I used to do it, I had 1,400, I had 700 producers, 3,500 shows, and 3 studios. I had a separate world called public access, and they came in and they did their thing. What we've combined now, and I think what you've done is a great future plan, it's perfect, is public access is still not clear. They, as the Leslie Duttons of the world, who walk in and want to create something or go in the field and want to create something, they don't want to be told what to do, how to do it, and so on and so forth, because that's the true freedom. How does that work within this $2 million, roughly, the 700,000 and the 1.2 million? Just curious.
Let me step back 1 second before I directly answer your question, Councilman, because it kind of sets the foundation for where we are today. Prior to the state franchise, when we had 15 public access facilities running throughout the city, there were dedicated local stations to run the public access content that was being generated in those studios, as well as any producers that brought content to that local area. When the new state franchise went into play, the operation of those public access facilities ceased. And in order to address still being able to get public access content out on a cable station, we worked with Channel 36 and their board to develop a new process where public access producers, although we didn't have a station to offer to them where they could go and actually film their content, but if they had produced content, they then could bring that to Channel 36, which developed a process for getting that information and vetting it and being able to put it online. And when I say putting it online, I'm going to let Channel 36's station manager, Carla Carlini, address the question a little deeper, but they have developed a process where public access producers can come before them, submit their content, and then get the content aired on the channel, as well as they even have a website that's for on-demand access to all the content. So here what we were doing in this plan was really, again, beefing up the capability of the station, trying to be, again, sensitive so that we're balancing government access, public access, and educational access, putting some additional resources to public access that would allow them additional capability to create content, and then also to be able to support a public access studio so that public access producers would have a location to go to, not, say the only location that's going to meet all of their needs, but at least it would be something that would be able to support them.
If I might add, we started this work really, literally, sometime in September to bring this report to you. We looked at the numbers, we looked at what we had, and we would refer you back to what we had before. What you did, by the way, for the city is you've got the cable operators to give us 13 public access studios.
No, I know.
The cable operators, right, when Time Warner last operated those facilities, had 49 full-time members. We're not even asking you for 47 to cover all of us going forward, but 49 just for public access. So you can imagine what they were paying. I'm sorry, 49 public access, full-time public access, and 4 part-time. So when they closed those studios, that's what they were operating on. Their operating costs were covered under our local franchise agreements by obligation. So the bottom line there is that we looked at, when we started this work, we looked at what we have and what would make sense going forward. And that's where we are.
No,
There-
I totally
and-
agree
and
with
one-
you guys.
and I know-
Carla, she walks on water as
Well-
far as I'm concerned in dealing with what she's been dealing with.
I just want you to know that there is opportunity for any public access group to come to the city, and they have presented us with a proposal that we couldn't get any traction from. We didn't hear back from you on it. You did get copies of it. So we looked at that, but we had no operational monies to offer them.
Sure.
Even if we look at the 1% monies, there's still $26 million left over that could fund any public access studios that another entity might want to proffer to the city. And if financially sound and they meet all the other requirements that the city might want to impose, there's no reason why they couldn't share in the 1% fund monies. It's the operational cost that we had to look at realistically. So we said, let's work with Channel 36 and then see how the council would react to that. Again, that's why we selected this menu options for you. Are we going to get the Cadillac version, the Volkswagen, the Chevy?
If I was a public access producer, the first thing I would want to ask is, where does my product go? How do I get my product developed? Because I had said publicly, I think my colleagues might have heard it, when the law changed in the state, I said it was the end of public access as you know it. And it was, because now we're trying to figure out how does public access continue in some form as an option for the public, unfettered, to use the airwaves.
Well, in our report, one of the addendums is a recent update from Sue Buskey, who used to be one of our consultants when we were going through franchise renewal that went nowhere. In her recent report, 200 public access studios have closed in California
Right.
as a result of DIVCA and nothing else, by the way. So, just so you know. I'm sorry.
Carla?
Good afternoon, Carla Carlini, General Manager of LA 36. 2 years ago, we were asked by the City Council to take over this portion of public access as it exists today. Obviously, we didn't have the studio capacity to be able to help in that regard, but what we could do was give a platform to the public access producers in which to air their content on TV. We obviously had to come up with a plan. Our programming grid was filled already with our own educational and community access programming. But what we did is we carved out various time slots so that we would be able to accommodate public access. And what our board did, in cooperation with the ITA, was to develop some regulations and some formatting as far as what we would accept as far as public access. And what we did is we created a blue ribbon panel that would review all the public access content that comes in on a quarterly basis and determine what the best of was, because we only had a finite amount of space in which to put it on our air. Quarterly determining what is the best of, and then that programming ends up on our television channel. However, all of the rest of the remainder of the programming also goes onto our website. Okay, so nobody was left out, and we have a very robust website, la36.org, if you haven't had the opportunity to see it.
If it met your guidelines and criteria.
Correct.
Right.
And by guidelines and criteria, things like no profanity, adequate audio, video, et cetera, et cetera. And I can tell you that of all the submissions, I would say about 98% of what was submitted ended up either on our television channel or on our website. What's interesting to note is 2 years into this now, even in the absence of public access studios, we are still getting many submissions. Now, they may not be from LA stakeholders, and a lot of them are, but some of them are not. We still have a very robust public access programming, if you will, on our channel. So much so that, and please keep in mind, we've received no additional operating dollars for this. I have 2 full-time staff members, one of which is myself, for a 24/7 television station. And I tell you that because what happens is this public access programming grows, if you will. So these producers that were allowed on our air back in January of 2 years ago, they have a year in which to continue to submit their programming. Well, you add producer on top of producer on top of producer, you're dealing with a lot of programming that's coming in. I, at this point, am going to have to add a staff member. I don't really have the funding for that, but I'm going to have to adequately address this. And we are happy to do so. The LACTAC is more than willing to take on an even bigger role as far as public access is concerned. We have become adept in dealing with these producers and this type of content, and that's really our position on it.
Thank you. Mr. Parks?
I was just going to ask, all the material that you've given us today, is any part of this in your 11-12 budget? Have you addressed that at all?
Yes, Councilman, the transfer of the existing cost-neutral positions from general fund to TDA are included as part of our budget proposal.
Okay, what about your 1%?
The 1% fee for the consultant to come on board to help us with the studio design and build,
Was included for the 2011-2012.
it was.
Yes, it was.
Okay, for next year.
Right.
And then what about the issue of 40-60 split? How did you address that?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, the other component I was going to ask that's also included is part of, and there's a representative here from City Clerk on this as well, but City Clerk also included in their budget submittal for 11-12 proposed budget the positions and expenses that we identified in this plan. They included that.
So you
That's
basically,
2 positions.
Correct.
Yeah.
so you basically have captured the essence, maybe not the Cadillac, but the essence of getting started with a multi-year approach to deal with all of these issues and multiple departments that are included.
Yes.
Yes, Councilman.
Do you have any idea of a dollar figure that you put in the budget?
For the positions at 6.8.
6.8?
Yeah, I believe we initially submitted 6.1, But today, we found out that it should be 6.8, by the way.
But that 6.8 includes the cost-neutral positions that are already being paid for by the city?
Yes.
General
yes.
fund?
It is the cost neutral positions.
Except for the two from,
No, it should include the two from the city clerk.
okay.
What is, I'm not familiar with the term, what do you mean by cost neutral?
They're already in the budget. They're just not being paid out of the TDA account. They're being paid out of the general fund.
Okay, but your goal is to move them all.
Correct.
To
Correct.
the TDA,
So
categorically.
today in the 10-11 budget, all of those positions are part of the city's budget in ITA and city clerk. For the submittals that were proposed for 11-12, each department specified that the funding would change for those positions to no longer be general funded, but to now be TDA.
So the funding amount wouldn't change, just the category of where they're being paid out of.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, then let me ask you this, when you finished with all of it, did you go back and look at what the percentage of the TDA would be covered? How much would that be? Not counting the 1%, but how much would what you're recommending be covered by TDA?
In 2015, 2016, we would go to 45% of the,
What about this coming year?
For the coming fiscal year, it would be 25%. So we would jump from the current 14% that we use to 25. So it would be an 11% increase.
Even though this year was down, you've been averaging somewhere about 18 to 20 in the previous 2 years.
between the last 3 years, including this year.
So the thing is so your initial step is to get it back to 2 or 3 years ago and then elevate it over time. Is that the game plan?
Yes.
After
Yes.
next budget.
And the services will remain the same in the next coming year. It's just the label on the employees that we're dealing with will be TDA funded rather than general funded, just so you know.
So as it stands right now, looking at your proposal on page 18, the 2011-12 fiscal year, it's cost neutral on the overall budgeting.
That
It's
is-
categorically changing it, but overall, it's the same amount as spent in 2010-11.
That is correct.
Councilmember Zine?
Okay, just a couple practical questions. Is the balance, is for IT, do you have a balanced budget, or is there a deficit?
We currently have, for this current year, we have currently a $570 million deficit, or excuse me, $570,000 deficit. We had a $5.4 million deficit that was structurally built into our budget, and we've addressed all of it but $570,000 to date, and we are working actively right now on the remaining $570,000.
Okay, are there furloughs at IT at this time?
Yes, we have 70% of our staff are coalition that are subject to furloughs. So we have the majority of our staff taking 26 furlough days. We do have the other 30% taking, 10 days or even our non-rep employees, which we have a few of those as well.
And how many did you lose for ERIP?
We lost, the exact number for ERIP is not in my head, but the grand total between ERIP and layoffs is over 190 positions. So we had gone from 540 positions, 740 positions down to about 520 right now.
But with the furloughs, if you look like at full-time equivalents, you're down to like 412 or something like that.
In terms of real equivalents, with taking into account the furloughs, we're about at 420 people, and that's with the current level of furloughs. If we were to increase to, say, 10 days of furloughs for that other 70%, it would drop us down to like 300, a little over 300 employees, which if you look historically just over the last 4 years, that would almost be half of our staff that we had only about 4 years ago.
And you mentioned that a number of jurisdictions have done away with their operation. Is there any law, requirement, ordinance that requires that we have the public access, or that we broadcast the council meetings, or is there any restriction?
Absolutely. There aren't any restrictions or obligations either way.
I should say obligation.
Yeah, there are no obligations on the part of any locality, any municipality to have public,
That's why
educational, or governmental access.
That's why some have abandoned, because there's no obligation to do that.
That's correct.
Legally,
Obviously,
No, not some, all.
It's legally at the sole discretion of the government, the local government entity. The last attachment, and I don't know if you have the report before you, the hard copy of the report before you for the 5-year plan, but attachment 4 is a listing of California local cities, and there's 50 of them included that have actually shut down their public access facilities
Because of funding?
because of the state franchise, losing control over, direct control over those franchises.
And the 36, I thought that at one point that we had disconnected with 36. So it's still on a shoestring, would you say?
Yes.
Channel 36 is on a shoestring budget. Their operating budget out of the 5% monies is approximately $250,000, and then about $350,000 from the 1% capital money. So they have dramatically reduced their budget, and they have always, and again, Carla can speak to this, they have always utilized the city's grant to fund a portion of their operations and did outside fundraising and using and providing services to outside entities to bring in additional operating expenses to their operations. And they're continuing to do that because they wouldn't be able to survive on just the monies that the city is providing.
And also on survey, have we ever surveyed to see what type of viewers we have, whether it be the council meetings or any other type of public access?
Yes, we have. I'm going to let William respond to that in more detail.
A couple of years ago, we, on a shoestring budget of $10,000, we asked Nielsen to work with us on a phone survey. These surveys, regular Nielsen surveys, run about $1 million a month.
Right.
So they did the survey for us, and they found a really high take rate, by the way, for government and Channel 36 access. But we couldn't rely on those numbers because they would have to redo it, and we didn't recommission that.
So what were those numbers at the time?
They were somewhere close to 50% of viewership in the city. Well, I'm not saying 50% of the city, but 50% of the people that
Sample.
that were sampled knew of or had watched Channel 35. And in terms of their regular viewership, it was something around 23% where they would get into the channel on a weekly basis, which is good because Channel 36 is on the lowest service tier, so as people are channel surfing and they see a council meeting or some other program of interest on those channels, they'll stop.
Yeah.
So.
And then because I'm trying to balance this. Today in the council, we were discussing the budget, how we're taking police officers out of the field, putting them in the jail, how the city attorney is eliminating operations, and obviously we have a certain number of dollars and trying to spread it to provide all these services. 311, I called 311 recently after hours. They're now shut down. How do we, if we have funds, can we use some of these funds to staff 311 24 hours a day like we used to?
No.
Or is that totally separate from this?
We can do whatever we want with the 5%.
The 5% is rent money.
Okay.
And that's subject to your discretion. In that one slide, it's slide number 3.
Yeah.
On page number 3, what we didn't add was subject to the approval of mayor and council.
Yeah.
So that gives you the discretion, and that's what Mark was mentioning to you. That gives you the discretion to use the 5% monies in any way.
So we could actually bring 311 back up 24
Yes.
hours with that.
Of course.
And maybe not fund everything you're looking for. Not that you're looking for the world. I mean, you're trying to, I can see, put something that can give you some access, not asking for the world when you're coming from the 740 personnel, the numbers you're bringing up. And then in next fiscal year, you have your 5-year plan, but would this kick off next fiscal year and then continue?
Yes.
So you're talking about July 1st?
Correct.
Correct. It would continue, it would begin July 1st, and it would go for 5 years. But again, in terms of real increases in 5% monies, it would be flat for the first year. Because it would be that cost-neutral shift to taking positions that are already paid for a general fund, now just designating those as TDA-funded.
And as the consumer rate goes up, then we get a larger portion on that 5%?
That is correct. For both the 5% and the 1%, we would get an increase.
So if someone's paying 100 now, then they pay 150 next month because they broaden out the channels, we'll get a larger piece of that action.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Just on a percentage basis, not on a per
Percentage
customer.
basis. Right, on a percentage.
And that's what traditionally, historically has happened. There hasn't been a drop, even in this recessionary period that
Yeah.
we've been in.
Okay, thank you.
We have one card for public comment. We have Leslie Dutton. And just to be clear, even though I mentioned an RFP, we're not taking bids at this time, but comment however you like.
First, I want to thank Councilman Rosendahl for calling me a couple hours before the meeting and inviting me to come, representing the Public Television Industry Corporation. We want to support Councilman Rosendahl. We want to support the city and any efforts that they might have in restoring public access. But today, honestly, I didn't hear that. And from the people here that work for ITA, I see that their main focus is on their operations, and that's understandable. But I wanted you to know, I distributed a press release here to you, that it's ironic that just last week, January 18th, we put out a national press release about the public television industry's launch of a new website. We are in the business of fighting to save public access. And we are doing everything positive we possibly can. You may or may not know this, but full disclosure has expanded the distribution across the country of our programs that are produced here in Los Angeles independently. The demand for public access programming is growing. But ironically, we are not on in Los Angeles for a number of different reasons, not the least of which is the fact that both of these channels of the city have made it a very unfriendly situation for public access producers. Even when we've produced a series that is very popular across the country right now called Saving Public Access in America, is featured now on 70 community cable stations across the country, but I can't even get it on here in Los Angeles. So I'm here today to tell you that the people that are mentioned in this press release, and that you can see all of our Board of Advisors, regret very much that we didn't have the notice to be here, because they would like to have been, to tell you how important it is. But we are proceeding, and we are in the process of getting producers programming, and we're going to encourage them to continue the fight. And we would like to participate in the process and have a say at the table. After all, PEG stands for Public Education and Government.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie. Okay, that concludes the public comment cards. Public comment for item number 2 is now closed. You really caught my attention when your press release has Ron K. in it, as a representative of the Valley myself. Anything else on the presentations? I know we asked you a bunch of questions. Really appreciate it. Again, thank you, Andrew, for all your time, your volunteering. Really appreciate it. Any more questions from the committee? No. Okay. So earlier I made instructions to the IT committee. Is there any other instructions to any of the other departments? And also, as the chairman of the budget committee mentioned before he had to leave, that he wants to make sure that your department clarifies for his purposes from the budget committee as they get involved in the deliberations very shortly on the budget process for the next fiscal year, to make sure that we're clear on the positions that you've identified in your report, and also the cost neutrality of your report when it comes to the budget year 2011-12. Okay? So please, I'm assuming that's an instruction on his behalf. So if it wasn't received that way, I want to make sure that you understand it that way. Okay? So seeing no more questions from the committee, that concludes item number 2. So what we'll do is, as far as I'm concerned, as far as the IT committee, I will continue this item so that we can hear the instructions that I gave the department, and that we can conclude. And then, obviously, since it involves budget matters, then eventually it'll go to the budget committee as well. Okay? Great. All right. Thank you very much. This committee's, anybody here for general public comment?